In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act took place, making it so the citizens who lived in Kansas and Nebraska area could choose whether they wanted slavery or not. Even though this seemed like a considerable idea to the people of the South, the populace of the North were angry. This act repealed the Missouri Act, which caused slavery to be illegal from the 3630 line. Since Kansas and Nebraska were both in the northern area, conflict ensued, bringing about Bleeding Kansas and later on even the Civil War. Rewind time about 160 years, back to when the middle-aged Stephen A. Douglas proposed the Kansas-Nebraska Act as a bill on January 4th, 1854. Douglas made the act to please Southerners, but he needed votes to organize the Nebraska Territory, that meaning killing off and relocating all the natives that currently lived in the area to make a transcontinental railroad that would go from the east to the west of the continent. When the Kansas-Nebraska Act finally became an act on May 30th, 1854, parts of the nation were overjoyed, the South, and parts were seething in anger, the North. Because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act being finalized, the short-lasting Missouri Act was repealed and no longer a law. This is where the problem all started. The Missouri Act, being put in place in 1820, made it so slavery was illegal beyond a 3630 line. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, however, gave Kansas and Nebraska territories the chance to choose whether or not they wanted to make slavery illegal. Now you may be asking, why is this a problem? It was a problem because it gave Southerners the chance to make slavery illegal in a northern area, both Kansas and Nebraska being over the 3630 line. This sparked outrage in northern abolitionists and excitement in southern pro-slavers. Even though politicians like Douglas thought the Kansas-Nebraska Act would go evenly, Nebraska being a free state and Kansas being a slave state, the entire situation did not go as planned. They were right about Kansas being a free state, but they were wrong about everything going smoothly. Kansas, the state they hoped to be pro-slavery, gained much conflict due to being in such close proximity to the slave state of Missouri, and had a mini-civil war known as Bleeding Kansas. Bleeding Kansas, also known as Bloody Kansas, was a mini-civil war that started in the year of 1854 and ended in 1861. While the fighting and bloodshed happened in Kansas, many of the people fighting weren't even from the area. The ones that were fighting were abolitionists from the north and pro-slavers from the south, most of them being from Missouri. The main conflict started when Northern abolitionist Eli Thayer arranged the New England Emigrant Aid Company, where he sent around 1,200 Northerners to Kansas to flood the polls and make it a free territory. While this seemed like a good idea to him at the time, it backfired. When Southerners heard about Eli's plan, they were furious and sent thousands of Southerners, most of them being from Missouri, to vote pro-slavery in the Kansas Territory. Because of how many people coming from outside the state, only half the people voting were actually citizens, causing the winning vote to be pro-slavery. Now you may be thinking this is a one-time thing, but this happened multiple times in the Bleeding Kansas era. Citizens from Missouri, also known as border ruffians, would cross the Missouri border to the Kansas Territory to vote for pro-slavery officials and such, making an unfair vote for citizens who lived in Kansas. One example of this is the election held on March 30th, 1855, where a poll was held to pick the territory register. Like all other votes that were held in Kansas, border ruffians came across and messed with the votes, putting pro-slavery government officials in office. The new territory legislature made what was known as the bogus laws. These laws leveled severe penalties against anyone who spoke or wrote against slaveholding, giving them punishments like death and being sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. These new laws filled Northerners with rage and caused them to set up their own free state legislature at Topeka, capital city of Kansas. These two governments conflicted each other and caused many disputes. Now, some may think the only conflict in Bleeding Kansas was between the pro-slavery and the Northerners, but that is untrue. On the northern side, there were many conflicts between each other. Unlike what most people think, not all Northerners came down were true abolitionists. In fact, it was only a select few that actually cared for the slaves. The majority of the Northerners were part of a movement known as Free Soil. They did not care much for the slaves. They only wanted free territory for free white people. The advocates for free soil did not like that plantations prevented white working people from having their own homesteads. They also did not like that slavery brought about large sums of black people, so when they held a vote, they voted 1,287 to 453 to outlaw black people from Kansas. Right before the worst of the conflict, pro-slavers in 1856 decided to move the pro-slavery capital to Lecompton, 12 miles away from the Free State stronghouse. Imagine the tension caused by this, the two opposing governments being about half a marathon away. Later on, in April 1856, a three-man congressional investigating committee came to Lecompton to see what was causing the conflict in Kansas, and they soon ruled that the elections were false and that the citizens wanted there to be no slavery. While this was stated, the pro-slavers never left and stayed the government of Kansas territory. Because the people in Kansas did not want slavery, pro-slavers became violent, tarring, feathering, and kidnapping and killing free staters. An example being on May 21st, 1856, a group of pro-slavery men burned down the Free State Hotel, destroyed 2 printing presses, and ransacked homes and stores. Free staters, on the other hand, decided enough was enough, and they retaliated. Abolitionist John Brown gathered a group of men and attacked at Potawatomi Creek and dragged 5 pro-slavery men from their homes, hacking them to death. This ensued more violence, an attack on pro-slavers in Osawatomie and in Congress, where an abolitionist senator, Charles Sumner, delivered a speech called The Crime Against Kansas, in which he implicated pro-slavery senators Atchison and Andrew Butler of South Carolina of harlot slavery, which caused Congressman Preston Brooks to act out and attack Sumner's while he was at his Senate desk with a cane. In all this conflict and bloodshed, there seemed to be no way to find compromise, until in the summer of 1856, where John W. Gary, a new territorial governor, started to restore peace in the chaotic Kansas territory. While things were looking up, a horrible act of violence occurred, and it being known as Maurice des Singles. On May 19, 1858, Charles Hamilton, a border ruffian from Missouri, gathered some men and rode through the village of Trading Post, where they kidnapped 11 Free State men and opened fire on them, killing 5, injuring 5, and leaving 1 to escape. Sarah Reed, the wife of one of the men kidnapped, chased after Hamilton and spread word of what happened. People soon heard about the massacre, and many more came to help, some even chasing after Hamilton and his gang. After Bleeding Kansas occurred, Kansas tried to apply for statehood many times before it was accepted as a free state after a 4th convention in Wyandotte. In July 1859, they got a free state constitution, but because of pro-slavery forces in Senate, it only became a free state in 1861 after Confederate states left. While Bleeding Kansas was a horrible event in American history where about 55 people died, we can look back on it as a key place in time that helped spark the Civil War, bringing freedom to everyone. Yup.